thank you so much. Today's presenters are Nicolas, Crisosto from ILRC, I hope I pronounced his name correctly, and Derek Zarda from ILRC San Francisco. And unfortunately, Cary won't be able to join us today, but I will let Nicolas start the presentation. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. Just again, thank you so much, Shannon and Rosemary and everyone at the Assistive Technology Network for helping us get this set up. Just going to introduce myself. I'm Nicolas Crisosto, the Assistive Technology Program Coordinator at ILRC, and all of our presenter contact information is included in the slides at the end of this presentation. Derek, do you want to introduce yourself before we get started?
Derek Zarda. I'm the Assistive Technology Educator at the Independent Living Resource Center here in San Francisco. I've been working here at the center for about 3 years now, and really excited today to be talking with everyone here about alternative strategies for funding assistive technology. And today's topic is creative funding for assistive technology. So when a person has a disability, many times assistive technology can make the difference between reliance and independent living. Covering the cost of the necessary equipment oftentimes proves to be too costly. Attending this webinar, we hope that you will learn about various alternative funding strategies for assistive technology and how to work with people with disabilities in achieving these goals. We will explore community funding opportunities, how to use internet-based funding websites effectively, such as Kickstarter and Indiegogo, as well as how to tap into personal financial resources and support networks. Through the use of these resources, you will be able to build successful strategies for funding assistive technology.
Today's presentation is creative funding for AT, and the agenda is we're going to do an overview. Derek and Nicolas are going to do that, doing the introductions, and then the survey results will be towards the end of the presentation. And then they're going to talk about non-traditional funding sources for AT, such as budgeting and serve coordination, non-AT community grants, working with community organizations, grant requests. And then later on they're going to talk about identifying and understanding emerging funding opportunities, crowdsourcing fundraising, crowdfunding example. And then next they're going to talk about next steps and where you guys can begin. And then we're going to have hands-out and fundraising templates. I'm going to be pushing those out to you guys. And then later we're going to have an opportunity to discuss the ideas for creative funding for AT.
Just talking about some of the reasons that we're here today. And part of it is because we are all very persistent when it comes to assistive technology, as evidenced by this webinar and all the setup it's taken. But most of the time, we're here because a consumer has set an AT goal. And as AT advocates, we're working with people and their goals for independent living. We've gotten to the place where we're looking for other types of funding because, for example, the individual doesn't qualify for insurance, for Medi-Cal or Medicare or any type of private insurance, or the specific assistive technology goal is not covered by insurance, even if they are eligible for Medi-Cal. Maybe they don't qualify for usual funding sources like working with the Department of Rehabilitation. For whatever reason, those resources aren't available. And before this webinar, we actually sent out a survey, and some of the questions about funding issues came up were about how to use Medi-Cal or insurance. And so we just wanted to let everyone know that the AT Network does have other types of training and resources on what type of equipment is available for funding through Medi-Cal. Next slide, please. So just throughout the whole process, we want to remind ourselves that it's important to keep the consumer involved in the process. That's integral as part of independent living. And when we go into the less traditional funding sources, there can be a tendency to get really excited because you'll start seeing that this goal is very achievable if we put in this paperwork and the research, but we have to remember to keep the consumer involved. And the other thing to remember is even if the goal is not funded, the consumer still may be able to gain increased independence through the process of working with an assistive technology advocate. So our role as AT advocates is independent living, increased independent living for our consumers. And we have to be prepared for those little unexpected successes that come along the way as somebody's developing and increasing their independence. It may not be that we actually get that particular goal that we started with funded, but there are other goals that can be achieved. Next slide, please. Earlier, before this webinar, we sent out a survey, and we just wanted to share the information that we found. The first question was about community block grants, and we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about community development block grants because most of the people who responded were not familiar with that type of resource. And so Derek's going to be talking about that a little bit later. We're also going to be spending time talking about approaching community and service organizations because over 50% of the people who responded to our survey said they weren't very familiar with approaching organizations like Kiwanis or Rotary to ask for funding for AT. Next slide. We also asked if participants who were interested in this webinar were familiar with using the internet to raise funds for assistive technology. And only 11% of the respondents said they were familiar. They said that they were using social media or researching grants. But 89% of the respondents said they were not using the internet. And so we're going to be talking a lot about that. We also asked a trick question to see if anyone was familiar with crowdsourcing or crowdfunding. And we got 100% no, people don't know what that is. So we're going to talk about that, and we have a lot of examples of how you can use that to be successful. Next slide, please. We asked if people are familiar with assisting an individual to create a budget to fund their AT goal. And again, the majority of respondents were not familiar with that process. So we have some handouts and some information to address that issue as a strategy. Next slide, please. I'm not going to read over all of the responses for question 6. They are in the materials. The question was, what obstacles to funding AT have you encountered? And respondents shared some responses, for example, finding funding when generic funding resources have been denied, or working with multiple agencies, how complicated that might be. So we're going to be talking about some strategies, but it is a good, we have to pause and just understand that we don't have any magic bullet or formula for getting something funded immediately. This is a process. All of the resources that we're going to be sharing today do require some investment of time and some organization. But we're going to hopefully be able to help you realize that it's not a daunting task. Anyone can do it, especially if you're motivated to help someone reach a goal. And the last question that we asked, next slide please, is what do you feel you would like to learn more about to assist you with the obstacles that were indicated in question 6. And some of the responses we are going to be able to address. Again, questions about what Medi-Cal covers, we're going to defer to other resources that exist. But we're going to be talking about resources that private foundations may be able to provide, information on how you might get universal devices funding, what you might be able to do to help somebody who doesn't have a specific type of medical condition that results in a disability, and so they need more general funding. So we're going to be trying to address all these issues. Next slide, please. The first strategy that we have for you is what we would call budgeting and service coordination. And budgeting is definitely something that falls under the category of independent living skills. It's one of those skills that sometimes the consumer may not have had the opportunity to develop because maybe they grew up and just weren't given access to making independent choices regularly, or they just haven't had the option to really think about how to make the funds that they have available work best for them. A lot of times you can coordinate for budgeting questions with a community living advocate. For example, in our office in Santa Barbara, we have a great community living advocate who works with consumers on housing issues and also independent living skills. And I would probably say, hey, community living advocate, would you work with this consumer and help and assist them to come up with a budget and understand maybe there are ways that they can free up some of their own financial resources to help fund their assistive technology goal. A lot of times we discount that if people have the option to make choices, they can set priorities, and that goal for independence, when it's achieved, might even be that much more meaningful if they were able to contribute themselves. As we talk about some of these other resources, it'll also be important to note that when applying for grants or reaching out to the community, a lot of times you'll get a more positive response if the individual who's making the request is able to contribute something just to demonstrate how committed they are to their own goal for independent living. So we're going to talk about some of the steps to developing a budget. And at this point, Shannon, I would actually like to see if you can send out that Excel worksheet that is the example of the budgets to our participants, please. Before we start talking about those examples, the other option for budgeting is what we've just called service coordination. And it's not just working with a community living advocate, but sometimes it's working with a benefits advocate. And just making sure that, if there are any benefits that a consumer may be eligible to receive, is the consumer maximizing those benefits? For example, maybe you're working with somebody who is eligible for Medi-Cal and didn't realize it, and that eligibility could save them some money on premiums or on the amount that they're spending monthly for prescriptions, for drug prescriptions. Well, instead, if that funding can be shifted so they can start saving towards their goal, then they can contribute to their own assistive technology goal. Sometimes SSI benefits are not at the maximum level. I was working with a consumer who wanted to fund dentures, and she's in her 70s, and it was just something that she'd been living with for over 15 years, that she'd been having problems with her dentures. And we went through our county resources, and there just were not any options other than getting a full set of dentures for about 50% of the cost. But when we started talking more, I realized she wasn't getting her full SSI benefits. Something, when she applied, there was a miscommunication about her living arrangement. So we worked with our benefits coordinator and were able to get her SSI benefit raised by about $200 a month. So she's putting $100 a month aside, and she's going to be able to fund her own assistive technology goal. And then also, sometimes debt consolidation. If an individual comes to you and they have credit cards and they are paying things off at high interest rates, there are options to lower those payments and then take some of those funds and they can put them towards their own goal. Next slide, please. So this slide is about budgeting, and it's an example of how one can create a monthly budget. The Excel spreadsheet that we've sent out has 3 sheets in it. The first sheet is going to be the next 3 slides with these examples. So you don't have to worry if you don't catch everything the first time. But this is just an example of somebody who might come to you and they're a consumer and they're receiving $750 of SSI. And the first step might be to come up with a list of their expenses. And so I've provided some examples. In this case, this person might be receiving subsidized housing, and so they're spending a fixed amount for rent, $250, and then it goes through and lists the rest of their monthly expenses. So the first column is monthly budget amount. Now the budget, what a consumer has to understand is that's the maximum they should be spending each month. If they go over that, then they're actually not meeting their spending goal for that category. So there's a lot of discussion about, again, priorities, what do you want to do with the resources that you have, and taking responsibility for your choices and those consequences. So what we do is we set up a budget, and then we meet a few weeks later, usually about a month later. We'll ask a consumer to keep track of what they spent in the different categories. And there are ways to help people. You can set up envelopes to keep receipts, or you can set up envelopes labeled with the funds specifically for that activity. So for example, if somebody is saying they wanted to keep their monthly budget amount for groceries to $300 and they did cash transactions, they could put $300 in an envelope labeled groceries. When that money runs out, then they don't have any money for groceries. And so it's a really concrete way for people to understand how their budgets work. If they spend it all at the beginning of the month, then they have to realize that later on there are going to be choices they're going to be making. So we'll go on to the next slide, and this would be a month later or a few weeks after, where we have an opportunity to review the consumer's spending for the month, and we can put in the actual amounts that were spent. So the rent, for example, was $250. But the electrical bill was a little bit higher. It was $18. And so we have a difference. We have a third column that shows the difference. And that means that they are negative $3. They spent more in that category. And we would go through and put down the numbers for the entire month. And in this example, it just shows that, it was good. Overall, there was $16 left, surplus. But with $16, it might take quite a while to fund an AT goal. Especially, even if it's $400 or $500 for a device, it's going to take months and months of time. So once we've gone through this exercise, we would have more of a discussion. Are there ways to lower some of these expenses? And in the worksheet, in the Excel spreadsheet, I go into more detail with suggestions. But for example, you might have a conversation with someone about their toiletries and household products. Maybe they're loyal to a brand and they don't realize that they can get the same quality for half the price. And it's just talking with people and having a really open-ended discussion, sharing ideas and experiences. It's one of the great things about working in an ILC that so many of us are persons with disabilities. And so we can share personal experiences about, maybe how you choose not to have the biggest package of cable TV because you want to be able to do something else with your money. So in the next slide, please, we would talk about making adjustments. And the spreadsheet goes into a little bit more detail, kind of giving some suggestions about what that could look like. But it comes down to setting priorities and long-term planning, understanding that this is not necessarily going to be a strategy to fund something tomorrow. But it also gives you an opportunity to consider eligibility for programs that could free up some income. For example, maybe there's a food bank, and if a consumer can save $50 a month by using a food bank to supplement some of their groceries, then they could put $50 aside to start saving. It's an opportunity to set up a savings account, or even there are nonprofit organizations that will help consumers save and plan. It's also, once you're making adjustments, preparation for borrowing if necessary. There are no-cost loans, and when we say no cost, the loan organization does not charge an origination fee, so it doesn't charge a cent to create the loan, and it doesn't charge interest, which means if somebody needs to borrow $1,000, they're only going to be paying back $1,000. And when we're working with individuals who are on tight budgets, that's important, that $1,000 does not turn into $1,300 at the end of the life of the borrowing. One of the programs that is available around the country is the Jewish Free Loan Program, www.freeloan.org. And I've listed that website on this slide. They're a great organization for consumers who need to borrow up to $1,000. They don't need a cosigner. Normally, they're paying back $100 a month, but you can ask to work with them, and sometimes they can do a repayment plan of $50 a month. But it's just being really honest. And if a consumer has already set up a budget and they know that they have their funds allocated, it's a lot easier to go to a program and say, this is how I'm going to pay it back, and this is what I'm going to use those funds for. If somebody needs more like $3,000, so between $1,000 and $3,000, they ask for a cosigner. And that's a discussion that you'll need to have with your consumer, who in their personal support system might be able to cosign for them. Next slide, please. So that actually takes us to the end of our budgeting discussion. And I think we decided we were going to leave questions till the end, but I don't know if there are any questions that have come up in the chat box. Otherwise, I'm going to let Derek take over.
Hello, everyone. Hopefully not too loud, or my mic is not too close. If it's muffled or it's too loud, just please let us know in the chat box. I'm going to be going over just discussing a little bit about my experience with non-AT community grants. So in the process of looking for funding, it's always easiest, of course, to go towards ones that are already tailor-made for assistive technology. However, in my experience, I've found through trial and error and just through working with my coworkers here at the office that there's a kind of a door that opens when you start expanding beyond assistive technology-oriented grants. So I'm going to be bringing up two examples today during this section. One of them is an experience I had with fellow coworkers. A coworker of mine was working in the benefits area, and so she dealt primarily with a program called Season of Sharing that was concerned about providing rent coverage for people if they needed to have last month's rent paid, and if they weren't unable to go about doing this, and it would possibly result in them getting evicted and so forth, they could apply for this local community program. This was something that was funded through local donations being done through the San Francisco Chronicle. So we had a consumer, or she had a consumer who was actually more in need of assistive technology. She was in need of a laptop to stay connected to the community. She was homebound, and however, she was tech savvy, but due to her limited income and strained resources, there just wasn't that much available. What we were able to do in working together was, when we reviewed just exactly what the requirements were for this program and to what end it was supposed to benefit the person, we found that we were actually able to broaden or to kind of rewrite the purpose for her applying for this program to convey a sense that her being in the community is not just about covering rent. It is more so about what it does when she is able to participate fully in that community. This is something that I'll be bringing up later too when it comes towards grant requests, and being able to highlight the value of what exactly happens when a person obtains assistive technology. So we worked together with this consumer. We made sure, once again, and this is something that Nicolas and I discussed along with Cary during the formation of this webinar, was to make sure that we highlight at every part how important it is to make sure that we are doing this with the consumer and not for the consumer. And that is how we've always, I approached this with my coworker, with the consumer. They were on the call with us each step of the way while we were writing out this letter with her at her direction. And due to our coworker's connections, because she had been working with this program for a while, we already had an idea of how best to formulate this request. And so we were able to write this letter with the consumer, and this consumer was able to get funded a laptop that has enabled her to use video conferencing. So this consumer has been able to talk with people in the community. She has been able to virtually attend some of our presentations and events that we've had here at IRCSF in the past, and has kind of better gained a sense in the community. But once again, this would not have happened unless we kind of looked more closely at what this non-AT program was really trying to get as its end goal. I will touch on another example here. So there was another consumer who wanted to gain access to a adaptable software called Dolphin Guide Access. For those with low vision, this is a very pricey software that would basically make it easier to navigate a Windows operating system. And so it costs around $800. And so when we looked around at the different community grants that were available for this, we looked at one that was not aiming towards assistive technology, but more towards, again, greater community inclusion, and it was more about housing again, or just trying to stay within the community. And we looked at this consumer. I had a discussion with her at great length about what it was that she saw as value in herself within the community. And we saw that she was a volunteer at local organizations for a long time. She had been she had worked in the community for a long time as a dentist, and since retiring, she had worked with local planning for elders organizations. However, her resources became cut short due to family concerns, and so now she was in a really hard position. So in approaching this local grant, I had a discussion with the grant organization that was holding this opportunity, and we worked with one of their counselors at great length, developed a personal relationship with them, and made sure to stay connected with them at every point along the way. We developed a letter again that touched on these various points about just exactly what it would be when this person got this, if she did get this funding for this software, what the benefit would be to the community, how it would fit within the parameters of that grant, despite the fact that it was not an assistive technology-oriented grant. And once again, it was including the consumers and at the consumer's direction the entire time, not just me writing this letter and then showing the consumer later on. And through this process, we were able to fund her successfully this software, which she has been able to use. But in kind of going from these two examples, when you are looking towards your funding resources and you're looking at the local community level, make sure to definitely pay attention to not just the description of the grant, but more so for not just what the grant is trying to accomplish, but what the organization itself holds as being important in its values and in its mission statements, and also to be able to find and locate either within your own staff or within contacts that you may have outside of the office, people who know this organization well, and if not, starting it from the ground up. Many times on the webinars in the past that I've seen here on the AT network, we've touched on, or I've heard touched on, how important it is for relationship building and expanding outreach for, finding funding for reuse, for expanding outreach for device-linked library programs, but making sure that even if it's not an AT-specific funding program, to definitely be able to check in there and see within the description. Approach it from a broad perspective at first, and then being able to expand and better clarify just how exactly this assistive technology will meet those goals and needs of the grants and be able to add value back to the community. I'll be touching more on different parts of letter writing later on during the grant requests, but for now, that's what I have. So I will turn it back over to Nicolas for community organizations.
There was one thing that I wanted to add just about community development block grants. At a meeting that we had in Southern California, the last in-person meeting, SCRC, I think it was, Southern California Rehabilitation Center in Downey, they are doing some really innovative work. And if you have questions or want to pursue that avenue, you should look at what they're doing. I believe it's Mike Bailey gave us a presentation, and he would be a really good resource. So the next slide is working with community organizations. And this is actually information that our colleague Cary McGill sent us, and so we just wanted to make sure that we recognize her contribution. And what we wanted to share here is a little bit about when you're working with somebody and they're not going to be able to get that funding through those traditional sources. We have to look at their personal support system, friends, family, neighbors, church, service groups that they might be involved in, or what Derek was mentioning, just get to know the consumer and who they might be able to affiliate with. So it's important to have specific goals, pricing, ordering information, all of that information before approaching community members for support. It will go a long way if when an individual is talking to community members, they can say, this is exactly how much it's going to be, this is where we're going to order it, we've already done some background and we know that we can get it online at this vendor for a savings of 20%. It just shows that person is invested in their own. Some ideas for sponsorship options, because it's not always can an organization write a check, but maybe if it's not a direct donation, would they be open to matching donations? Sometimes an organization may have funds, but they really want to see you commit to it. And you might be able to get a group to say, if you raise $500, we'll give you $500. And then they can go to their members and say, this person is that committed to their goal. But you can also talk to them about sponsoring a goal through bake sales, through yard sales, benefit concerts with local musicians, barbecues, car washes, restaurant fundraisers. It's an opportunity to be very creative, and you get to use the consumer's strengths. What does the consumer have to contribute? And the consumer gets to start immediately having an impact on what public perceptions are about the abilities of people with disabilities. Even before getting the AT, somebody can already start achieving goals for more independent living, and they're giving back. But also, you can get sponsorships through advertising in church, school, professional newsletters, and on websites. Getting the word out about what the individual's goals are, what they're going to be doing. Next slide, please. When you're working with community organizations, a lot of times there will be some type of application process. And there's a handout that we actually put together that's an example of different types of applications and grants when you're working with local organizations. Shannon, would it be possible to start sending that out, please? So, for example, some community organizations that you might consider approach, but there could be other specific organizations to your community. You want to find out if your local chapters have a formal application with deadlines, and that's something that you could be doing even before you have a consumer who is going to need some non-traditional funding. And you should be prepared to assist with a written statement of need and even a presentation at a local meeting. So if you know Rotary might be considering sponsoring an AT goal, a lot of times they're going to want to meet the individual. And so it can be an opportunity for you to work with a consumer and assist them to prepare a presentation, feel comfortable presenting, and it might be an option for you to assist them by helping do the presentation yourself. There are educational institutions that you can approach. Financial aid offices often have emergency grants or emergency loan programs. A lot of times people don't know that even if an individual is only a student and not even a financial aid student, They may not be getting federal financial aid or state financial aid. That emergency grant and loan money is similar to scholarship money, and it might be available. So somebody breaks their glasses, or their iPad gets damaged, or there's a repair that needs to be done to their power wheelchair so that they can get to class. That's an emergency situation. It's unexpected. And if they're a student or they have a relationship with one of those colleges or universities, they might be able to get some support there. But another suggestion that Cary had, she's worked with engineering departments or schools that have construction programs. And they can set up perhaps a specialized project for their students to be learning hands-on while they're helping to provide home modification or repairing an assistive technology device. It just takes creativity. And don't forget student service organizations. There are groups in your community that are looking for projects, and they may not have the technical expertise, but they could assist with doing a bake sale or some other type of fundraiser. Next slide, please. There are also, and Derek touched a little bit on this, reuse programs. We're seeing a huge expansion of reuse programs that are taking equipment, and sometimes the equipment can be lent, but also it might be donated. It may be something that an organization doesn't have space to keep, and they're just looking for the right person who's going to benefit from that equipment. But it's also important to encourage individuals and businesses to contribute gently used durable medical equipment and assistive technology to the reuse programs. We want to get it in there circulating so that it's available. The AT Exchange website is a fantastic resource. A lot of times we forget, sometimes there are items there that are looking for a good home and they want to be donated. And don't forget the Department of Rehabilitation. Now, I know we mentioned that this isn't going to be about working with the DOR, but this isn't DOR in the traditional sense. If you have good relationships with DOR counselors in your area, and they have equipment that has been returned, sometimes they can make it available to consumers who would not otherwise be eligible to receive that equipment. It's equipment that's just going to be sitting on a shelf somewhere. And if there's an option and you have a relationship, it never hurts to ask. Even if it's just a long-term loan, it could be something that gets your consumer closer to achieving their goal. There are also department stores, Walmart, Macy's. Sometimes they have community need funds, and you can find out what the application process is for those organizations. You should know what the criteria is. They a lot of times might be doing one cycle working with seniors or one cycle working with youth. So you're going to want to know that information. And this is also something that you can be doing as ongoing resources so that you have information when somebody comes in and say, oh yeah, you know, I think you might be eligible for this particular type of funding. And don't forget other nonprofit organizations. It's one of our roles as AT advocates. While we're working on a goal for a consumer, we can be out educating and advocating for general funding for assistive technology with other nonprofits, asking them to think about putting some energy into making funds available in the community, reminding them that between 1 in 4 and 1 in 5 Americans have some type of disability, and how assistive technology can be so important in people's lives. Also talking to them about matching donation requests. Next slide, please. And I'm going to actually let Derek talk a little bit more about grant requests in general, and then we can talk about some examples that I've sent you. If we run out of time, hopefully the document that we've shared, it lists 3 different types of applications and how you can work with the consumer to apply for some of those funds in the community. Derek, do you want to talk about grant requests?
Hello? Hi, sorry about that. I was just getting pop-ups from the different things you're sending out. So yes, thank you, Nicolas, and thank you again for that very informative coverage on community resources. So when it comes to grant writing, there's going to be basically with each different type of approach, the first, of course, is to look into identifying what grants are available. And so what I've found that has been one of the most beneficial sites is probably one that we've all used at some time when working with consumers and when brainstorming ideas, and that's Able Data. AbleData.com has a lot of great information. Let me see if I can type that into the box, as well as put some links in there as well, in finding out what state and federal grants are available in your area. There's one here that's a link for the state page for state grants, state organizations. And I'll be putting together I'm kind of editing a Word document on national and grants through different programs that are available too. But a lot of it comes first through the search and seeing, again, this all comes from the initial conversation you're having with your consumer. So during that discussion, very upfront, especially when it comes to assistive technology, I'll try to identify best, specifically the disability, different types of other factors can include ethnicity, the amount of their financial situation, their background. Many different grants are available that touch on different areas of need depending on what they're trying to resolve. So it could be someone who's their first person coming from a different country, first person out of their family with a specific condition or impairment. But once you find that right grant that you want to go after, and you've gone onto the web page and tried to identify what exactly is required within the grant request, the next part, of course, comes in with the letter writing. So when you're approaching the letter writing, in general, what do you want the consumer to say in their letter? Well, just like with any type of business letter, of course, you have a few different questions to ask. Why am I writing this? What would I like this organization to do about this situation that I'm in? Who am I as a person within my own community? Kind of touching on similar what we were discussing earlier with when you're working with these non-AT community grants, again touching on what is the consumer's value, what has been their contribution to the community, even if it's something that they have not been a volunteer at other organizations, touching again on who this person is, what they see and how they interact with the community, what benefit the community would get, what benefit how would this benefit the granting organization's mission statements, how would this best fulfill what that grant is trying to do, basically. And during this process, it's going to be a few different drafts, and you need to be able to let the consumer know and grant them also as many tools as you can during this process, so that even when they're not with you, they can be working on this when they are out of the office, at home, with members that they've identified as part of their support system, whether this be family, friends, community leaders, and so forth, so that they know that it's not just some big onerous burden that they're taking on themselves. And that through this process of getting the letter written and the different drafts, you want to make sure that if it's, depending on the organization, if they have local chapters, so if it's like the Christopher Reeve Foundation and they might have a local chapter in your area, to contact the representative over at that chapter and get in touch with people there to see what is exactly needed for these grant requests, but also to kind of, again, foster a relationship with them, kind of get an understanding from their end what it is that they're trying to benefit from these kind of grants. And there are certain things that you'll want to include in the actual grant application, and they should, like I said, list that on their website when you download it, such as a cover letter, a statement of purpose, possible physician letters, and so forth. But it's important, again, it varies from grant to grant that you are working on, but they're primarily the same, and once again, it will be outlined within the documents that you look over. But being able to kind of get a sense for, you know, what it is that this is going to be. Is it going to be a magic answer for their solutions? Maybe, maybe not. You know, it depends on. I kind of personally reserve the grant writing for the national level and state level after I've exhausted my local resources and kind of working upwards. So if I can't get it locally, go to the state. If I can't get through state, going through national private organizations or charity organizations. And the further up I go, I'm always trying to, in working with the consumer, by the way, I always try to let the consumer know and understand just where, you know, the viability, the possibility of getting these funds secured, and to keep in mind that it can be, it's a process, basically is what it comes down to, and that it may take a while to get an answer back. To also, once again, if there is a local rep or a person at the organization you can get in contact with to be able to check in with about the grant request. The person in one of the previous examples I gave earlier, on the local level, we had to stay in touch with our contact person there for months before we were able to secure the money. And that was just due to there was an open window for applying for this grant, and after it closed, there was time going to review the different requests and processing them and getting back. So it was definitely a long process, but we were able to secure the funding in the end. But I let the consumer know in the very beginning about this process, and that this was something that would take time, and they need to understand that even at the end of all this, we still might not get the actual funding. But the important thing here is to highlight that when you are going through this with the consumer, you're not just doing this with them or for them, you're also teaching them a very important tool that they can use on their own in the future too. So even if you happen to not secure the funding, if your request letter is denied, if it doesn't happen, that the process that they went through is one that they can take with them on experience, and they can apply that to applying to other grants on their own as well, so that you're teaching them of, you know, this very important skill that they can take with them and use again and again when needed. I'm sure there's going to be some possible questions in the end regarding this, so I can stop right now. But once again, I want to say that we will work on trying to get a list of the private organizations throughout the state and country too for these various organizations, so it's easier for you to access. But in my research, Able Data has always been a very helpful and useful website to use. But moving on towards crowdfunding, it's up next. We have Kickstarter. Kickstarter was first of all, can you just do a hand raise here? If you can go ahead and raise your hand or not. For those who have heard of Kickstarter, if you can raise your hand. Okay, we got one person. Okay. For those who, okay. Good. Okay, for those who don't know about Kickstarter, Kickstarter is basically kind of you kind of changed the game, if you will, on fundraising. So when it first came out, it was used for a lot of various different ideas. People who wanted to create art projects, media projects, people who wanted to create inventions that could serve specific needs, but basically, weren't able to approach different, organizations. They didn't know how to, break in. They would be able to craft a proposal and take it to the web, and through the use of a video presentation, as well as in their writing, kind of present what their idea is for what they would like to do to kind of make the world a better place, or just to make their invention or their dream come true. And by piecing it out at various levels, of $1 donations to $10 donations to $20 donations, they would be able to reach their goals. And with the best part being that these monetary donations wouldn't be secured unless they reach their funding goal. So if they didn't reach their goal within this set amount of days that they were having to reach, then the money wouldn't be taken from everyone else. So it was kind of a more safer way of raising money without the loss of funds if they weren't able to reach their goal, which made it kind of interesting too, because that they have a set limit on time, like 33 days, 50 days, what have you, to raise a specific amount, then it can kind of create that immediacy of need. And through the use of talking with friends, using social media such as Facebook, going on blogs, trying to spread the word throughout the community about their Kickstarter, even through local newspapers, they can try to kind of create a buzz about it and get the money that they need. But where Kickstarter started, a second organization has taken over for more, how should I put it, philanthropic, more humanitarian needs, and that's Indiegogo. Again, for those here who have actually heard of Indiegogo. Okay. So with Indiegogo, it's a very similar process in that of Kickstarter, in that it's something that a person can start a page or a project or a campaign and kind of show through a video presentation what it is that they would like to do or to achieve, and then again offer different levels to participate in for donations. $1, $10, $15, $25. Some of them have up to $75. And at each level, similar to Kickstarter, you're going to have different ways that the contributor can kind of get something back. So, or they can receive some kind of perks. So if they donate $10, they might be able to get maybe a framed a picture of the project while it's underway. If it's $25, they might be able to get something that they have completed. If it's an invention, like with Kickstarter, you're basically purchasing. You can purchase the item that they're trying to create through their campaign, at certain levels. I myself have purchased some assistive technology through Kickstarter by donating $35 up front, and then after they reached their goal, I was on their list for receiving one of their devices. It was a portable scanning device that is able to easily, assemble and take with you on the go. I received it 5 months after they reached their goal. And it's essential for people to realize that when they're donating to these causes, if it's for a specific device, that it's not like the same thing as purchasing it on Amazon. You're going to be getting it you're basically investing in this person, and that when they actually are getting around to producing it, and they give you an estimated delivery date, be flexible if they don't deliver on time. So that's kind of a quick overview of that. But for Indiegogo, the difference there is that there are people who go on there to fund trips to go deliver aid. I've had friends that funded trips to Detroit to go there for a conference to better work with local groups there and trying to assist with people going through intense poverty. I've had people who were funded trips to go down to Haiti to assist down there, and people who were able to fund personal needs through Indiegogo, because that's kind of more of what Indiegogo does. I guess it's more of a kind of a humanitarian twist, still similar to Kickstarter, but more towards providing a contribution. So you have a person, you're curious about looking into crowdsource funding. These are two popular programs that exist, or websites that exist. They're not the only ones. So you definitely want to do a search for other crowdsource funding programs that might be available, but the essentials are all the same though. You want to be able to frame your message. Right? You want to be able to first also see if this is something that is interesting to the person, to your consumer. Some consumers are tech savvy, some consumers are very open to talking with people in the community about their needs. Others aren't. And in both cases, either way, crowdsource funding can still help. It's kind of something what Nicolas touched on earlier in getting in touch with people in your community, is knowing your system of support. So being able to identify what your support network looks like. So if it's friends, if it's family, if it's community members, if it's your advocates at your ILC, that's so we are included in that support network. That is what's important in the process as well with crowdsource funding, so that in trying to identify where they can best help. So if the person that you're working with, a consumer, isn't someone who is that tech savvy or web savvy, or also maybe someone who doesn't want to personally take it on to promote this campaign, then to be able to identify those who can help and within their support network. At the very least, what every consumer can do is being able to tell their story. The same thing with the letter writing for the grants. You're basically presenting a snapshot of this person, or they are presenting a snapshot of themselves, who they are, how they add value to the community, what they hope to achieve in getting this funding, even if it's just to be able to live a better life or go out to see a movie. If this is something that's huge for people in trying to be included in their community instead of stuck within their home, if that should be the case, or not being able to access things in the community because they don't have a certain device. It's being able to kind of bring it down to a human perspective so that it's easier for people to understand what it is that they're investing in. So that it's not just, and again, this is kind of making sure to approach it not so much from a charity perspective, but more from a person-first perspective, so that you are investing in a fellow person in your community that can benefit, and that they can see through your presentation on these crowdsourced funding sites what benefit that they will be providing to this person. So it's kind of funny in going through this today how we see that each different approach, whether it's through non-community AT grants, community resources, contacting local organizations like the Kiwanis or the Rotary Club, or your various religious institutions, or using grants and writing and letter writing, or crowdsource funding, that a lot of it still centers around the same principles of being able to kind of get an idea and a conversation with your consumer, to know who they are, what their needs are, and know what their support network is to help them through this process of identifying and going after alternative funding. It's something that's definitely a team effort, a group effort. It's not something that can be achieved today or tomorrow. It's always a process, but it's one that once they go through it once or a few times, it's a skill that they have learned and that they can use again in the future. Whether it's with crowdsource funding, even if their campaign doesn't succeed the first time around, it doesn't mean they can't try it again and learn from their experiences. So in each of these things, it's more just about kind of getting an idea for how each one can best work with that person and their support network.
I just wanted to add a couple of comments about crowdsource funding and strategies. If we go past the you caring slide, it should be that slide. Just something to also take into consideration that could be a boon towards the individual's goal. If the consumer can partner with a nonprofit to make the fundraising eligible as tax-deductible contributions through either pass-through donations or restricted funding with that organization, then they can make some of the requests a little bit broader. So people might be more willing to donate if they know they're going to get a little bit of a tax deduction. And it's something that you can talk to an ILC about, or another nonprofit foundation in your community. They might be willing to do that. It also may make them eligible for matching contributions. So it's another way to leverage more resources in the community. But as Derek was saying so very well, it's an opportunity for teamwork, and it's all about developing those independent living skills. I just wanted to share on the next slide an example, and I won't go into details, but this is an example of what I'm working with a consumer. She has a goal for a device that's going to allow her to walk again. She has MS, and she wants to be able to walk independently. It's not covered by any insurance. It's $8,800. And so she has been working with friends and family and doctors, and now she's come to ILRC, and we're working together. And she's put together applications for grants, and she's done 2 You Caring fundraisers. She's already budgeted, so she knows she's going to be contributing $1,600 over 3 years to her own goal. And what we're doing is trying to raise the last $3,500. So we're doing it through a combination of trying to get some more grant money and debt consolidation. We figured out that she could budget and pay $100. We just need to find a loan program that will not cost her more than the $2,000 she's going to borrow. And we're pretty confident we're going to be able to do that. She's already ordered the device, and she's using it. So we're just putting together the last pieces. It's taken her over a year to work on this project, but that's how important it's been to her. And she's just a great example. She's been reaching out and trying everything she possibly can. So we wanted to make sure that we left you with some resources and just some next steps, some strategies, things that you can be doing whether you're working with a consumer right now or not. We suggest if you're not already familiar with it, become familiar with budgeting strategies. They can be very powerful. Spend time reviewing those websites, like Derek said, and just get to know what resources are out there. Familiarize yourself with grant applications. They can be a little daunting if you haven't done them before, but once you get used to the language and answering the questions and giving yourself time to work on them, then you can be a great resource to your consumers. So I always give the application to the consumer and let them work on it, and then if they need assistance or have questions, I try to be that resource. And like Derek said, if you have to, go and ask questions to the grant administrator. I always recommend to people to practice with their writing samples for requests, and don't forget, make time to do public education. Present at community organizations about assistive technology and the increase in need for funding. If they already know that you're doing this work in the community, when you have a particular consumer who has that need, you'll already have that relationship that Derek was talking about. And that's really the end of our presentation. So I'm just going to see if there are any questions.
Thank you so much, Nicolas and Derek. We do have a couple of questions on the chat box. Let's start from somewhere on the very top. And it says, I think it was a question by Patrick. It says something about the Jewish free loan, whether there is a cosigner necessary?
A cosigner is only usually requested if the amount is less than $1,000. So for example, in the Los Angeles chapter, a consumer can borrow $1,000 and they don't require a cosigner. They can borrow up to $3,000, but then they will require a cosigner.
Thank you. Okay, so are there other questions? That's the only question.
All of our contact information can be found on the last slide for Derek, Cary, and myself.
Thank you. That was on the very last slide. Okay, great. So the information's on it's on the slide here. If there aren't any questions, then I guess we're done with today's presentation. Thank you so much for your time. Have a good day. Bye.